जय 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 हरे कृष्णा हरे कृष्णा हरे कृष्णा शास्त्र भाजन
Prabhu Vishnu now.
What's that?
He's the in charge of the Bhagavatam Rasta.
Who is?
Prabhu Vishnu.
Oh, Prabhu Vishnu. I saw that our Rajamohan had URLs today in July.
Yeah. I can send that to you, Marsh.
I have.
Oh, you have it.
Otherwise,
Yeah, I got that. It looked really official. So we're ending the reception today. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Didati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I'll read through the first verses 14, 15, and 16, and then we'll collectively do number 17. Manur uvacha adesheham bhagavato varteyami vasudana sthanam tvihanujanihi prajanam mamacha prabho. Sri Manu said, O all-powerful Lord, O killer of all sins, I shall abide by your order. Now please let me know my place and that of the living entities born of me. So, no purport there. This is verse 15. Yad oka sarva bhutanang mahimagna mahambasi asya uddharane yatno deva devya vidhiyatam. O Master of the demigods, please attempt to lift the earth, which is merged in the great water, because it is the dwelling place for all the living entities. It can be done by your endeavor and by the mercy of the Lord. So this one does have a small purport. The great water mentioned in this connection is the Garbhodaka ocean, which fills half the universe. So when Garbhodakshaya Vishnu first comes into the universe, he fills the universe half full with his own perspiration. So that's where the water for the Garbhodaka ocean comes from. So here is verse, which one are we on now? 16 or 17? This is 16. Okay. Maitreya uvacha parameshti papam madhye tatha sannam avekshagam katam evang samuneshya iti dadyao diyachiram. Sri Maitreya said, thus seeing the earth merged in the water, Brahma gave his attention for a long time to how it could be lifted. Again, this one has a small purport. According to Jiva Goswami, the topics delineated here are of different millenniums. The present topics are of the Svetavaraha millennium, and the topics regarding the Chakshusha millennium will also be discussed in this chapter. So this one we will do responsively. This one is 3.13.17. Shrijato mekshatir varbhi. Shrijato mekshatir varbhi. Palavyamana rasamgata. Palavyamana rasangata. Atatra king anushteyam. Or atatra kim anushteyam. Asmabhi sargayojitahe. Asmabhi sargayojitahe. Yasyaham hridayad asam. Sad isho vidadhaut tu me. Sad isho vidadhatu me. Shrijato mekshatir varbhi. Palavyamana rasam gata. Tatra kim anushteyam. Asmabhi sargayojitaha. Yasyaham hridayad asam. Sad isho vidadhatu me. Shrijato mekshatir varbhi. Palavyamana rasamgata. Atatat kim anushteyam. Asmahabi sargayojitahe. Yasyaham vidyan asam. Sa isho vidadhatu me. Srijato mekshatir varbhi. Lavyamana gatam gata. Tatra kim anusteyam. Asmabi sargayojitaye. Yasyam hridaya asam. Sad isho vidadhatu me. Shrijato mekshatir varbhi. Lavyamana rasamgata. Atatra kim anushteyam. Asmabhi sargayojitahe. Yasyaham hridayadasam. Yad isho vidadhatu me. Ladies. Shrijato mekshatir varbhi. Lavyamana rasamgata. Atra kim anusteyam. Asmabhi sargayojitaha. Yasyaham hridayadasam. Sadisho vidadhatu me. Shrijatam while engaged in creation. Me, of me. Shitihi, the earth. Bharabhihi, by the water. Plavyamana, being inundated. Rasam, depth of water. Gata, gone down. Ata, therefore. Atra, in this matter. Kim, what? Anustheyam, is right to be attempted. Asmabihi, by us. Sarga, creation. Yojitahe, engaged in. Yasya, the one from whose. Ahang, I. Hridayat, from the heart. Asam, born. Saha, he. Ishaha, the Lord. Vididhatu, may direct. May, unto me. So this verse is translated as, Brahma thought, while I have been engaged in the process of creation, the earth has been inundated by a deluge and has gone down into the depths of the ocean. What can we do who are engaged in this matter of creation? It is best to let the Almighty Lord direct us. So responsively, Brahma thought, while I have been engaged in the process of creation, the earth has been inundated by a deluge and has gone down into the depths of the ocean. What can we do who are engaged in this matter of creation? It is best to let the Almighty Lord direct us. So the purport here is also quite small. The devotees of the Lord, who are all confidential servitors, are sometimes perplexed in the discharge of their respective duties, but they are never discouraged. They have full faith in the Lord, and he paves the way for smooth progress of the devotees' duty. Shrijito mekshitir varbhi plavyamana rasamgata tatra king anushteyam asmabhi sargayojitahe yasyaham hridayadasam sa isho vidadhatu me. Brahma thought, while I have been engaged in the process of creation, the earth has been inundated by a deluge and has gone down into the depths of the ocean. What can we do who are engaged in this matter of creation? It is best to let the Almighty Lord direct us. I'd like to start off by asking if any of you all have any questions about this chapter, anything that's come up so far, or anything in general. Oh yeah, we need to get the official pass around mic. Pardon us, folks, we have technical difficulties. No, here we go. I will pause for station identification. Whatever that is.
Lord Brahma is in the process of creation right now in this pastime.
Yeah.
So, how can we understand what's going on? I'm not sure what's going on right now.
Oh, okay. Okay. So what has happened up to this point was that Lord Brahma was generating various living entities. We heard about that in the last chapter in 3.12. So various 10 sages were generated. Then Varnashram Dharma and the Vedas and other things were generated. Finally, Swayambhuva Manu and his wife Shatarupa were generated. Now, Shatarupa and Swayambhuva Manu, particularly Swayambhuva Manu, is asking his creator, Brahman, or his father, what he should do. So that's kind of a short synopsis of what has been happening up to this point. And after Brahma was hearing these nice accepting prayers, so unlike the four Kumaras who rejected Brahma's proposal to create living entities, Swayambhuva Manu did not. He accepted his father's proposal. And then he asked him what he wanted him to do. And we find out that there were 3 things that Brahma suggested for Swayambhuva Manu. One of them was to create progeny in his wife. The second thing was to rule the earth according to the principles of devotional service. That was number 2. And what was the other thing that he wanted? I'm not thinking of it right now. There were 3 things. It was in the, I think, very recent last verses. Oh, yeah, and worship the Lord by performance of yajna. That was the 3rd one. That's back in verse 11 of this chapter. So he was supposed to create progeny in the womb of his wife, rule the earth according to the principles of devotional service, and worship the Supreme Lord with yajna. So those 3 things. So in one sense, that's kind of a short summary of what everybody should be doing. Well, not necessarily you have to create progeny in the womb of your wife. Not everybody necessarily has to do that. But the idea of ruling, or at least ruling your own life in conjunction or in harmony with the rules of devotion, which we all learn about. That's what the science of bhakti is about. And then worshiping the Supreme Lord with sacrifice. So that's kind of there. Does that answer your question, or is there more to it? Oh, Natabar is doing something. Any other questions that immediately arise? Or are there questions on the from our audience on the YouTube world, if anybody's out there watching it right now? At least our live cast. Maybe somebody will be watching it later on. Now, there are a lot of themes in this chapter, and I was thinking about them. You know, it was interesting that this Monday our Junananda gave a very nice explanation of Grihastha and Brahmachari principles. So we had that, and he described it. And then our Ram Roy on Tuesday described about this interesting writing of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his last writing before he left the world, about his intense determination to engage in devotional service, and he had, I think, 12 points or something like that, and this was very strongly explained in a very interesting way, about Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And then yesterday, of course, we had Pancharatna, and he was describing very nicely about the Gundicha temple cleaning, and how that is like a wonderful analogy for how we are trying to clean ourselves, which actually is really a good thing to go back to every once in a while, because in one sense, that's what devotional service is. We are trying to purify or cleanse ourselves. We are full of various kinds of, as it's mentioned, grains and straw and dirt and dust, and all these different things are various types of impurities, and we are trying to remove them. And if we do a good job of removing them, then naturally the spirit or the mood of the Supreme Lord will appear, and it will be just like a mind of a sage, or like the very cool summer breeze or something like that, coming to take away all kinds of anxiety and strife. So that's a point that's very interesting. I'm not really ready today to talk about either. Today is, of course, at least according to the ISKCON calendar, the advent of the Puri Rath Yatra, which is happening today, and also the disappearance of Swarup Damodar and Shivananda Sain. I'm not really prepared to talk about either of them, but I was just wondering whether any of these topics are interesting to you, and if you all maybe have a preference, So between the whole idea of Ratha Yatra, or this relationship between father and son, so Swayambhuva Manu is talking to his father Brahma, or the duties that are asked by Brahma from his son, or the Lord's fixing a situation, which is what we haven't heard yet, but we're going to find out about it very soon, because the earth plane, that it's actually, by the way, I wanted to make this clear, that according to devotees, that the earth that Varaha lifted is not Bhugola, the globe. He lifted the earth plane, Bhumandala, which is a different thing. And often in graphic depictions, we see him lifting the earth globe, which is actually not accurate. But according to Ganesham Gauranga, who researched it in Australia and gives a whole explanation of it, it is Bhumandala that's being lifted, not the earth plane, which is a very different thing, So at any rate, that's another thing that's going on, how Varahadev will fix the situation. Earth submerging, the ultimate goal, which is also discussed in this chapter later on, how we can come to the ultimate goal of spiritual life. And of course, last week we talked a little bit about this unusual explanation by, or this unusual exchange between Professor Albert E. Southers of Ohio State University and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who discussed various different topics of misconception, because here we're talking about the advent of Varahadev. And Varahadev is an expansion of the Lord in the form of a boar, which is quite odd, at least if you're coming from a Western background, why the Supreme Lord would come as, of all things, a boar. So those topics seem interesting to you all. Do you have a preference? Ratha Yatra, okay. Anyone else have a counter reference? Okay, that's interesting because there's a very nice book actually, which I had, but I could not find today. So it must be down here in my storage down here. I'll have to pull it out. Didn't have time to do that. But it's a book by Bhakti Purushottam Swami where he lists various different aspects of the Rath Yatra. And the Rath Yatra in general is a very interesting pastime. We see that we're getting into Rath Yatra season. We just had our New York Rath Yatra. Tomorrow will be the Brooklyn Rath Yatra, which probably most of you don't even know about. But there's a Brooklyn Rath Yatra every year done by Bengali devotees. And that's going to be at 5 to 9 p.m. Over in East New York, which will be interesting. And of course, we had the Rath Yatra, the one in Baltimore, and not tomorrow, but 2 days from now on Saturday will be 2 Rath Yatras simultaneously, the one in Parsippany and the one in Atlantic City, in front of the Trump land down there and everything. So that'll be going on Saturday. And then, we'll have successively more and more Rath Yatras. So this is Rath Yatra season. And as Pancharatna mentioned, the lore or the stories of Jagannath and what's going on in the world of Puri is very interesting, and it's got many layers. And even in Wikipedia, it describes, all these different layers of things going on, from how the Buddhists see it, how the Christians saw it, how the Shaivites and the Shaktas see it, how there are many stories about Jagannath and who he is, and even in ISKCON we have, I think, at least 5 different accounts of the whole story of Jagannath. There's, of course, the story, the most prominent story, of course, is the one with where Indradyumna Raj wants to see Nilamadeva. That's the one that most of you have probably heard. And so he sends out his minister, and his minister tries to find out something about Nilamadeva, and he's not successful, but he winds up staying in a town where there's Shabaras or pig farmers. And the Shabaras, he falls in love with one of the Shabaras' daughters, and he marries her. And then he's curious about where her father goes every evening, and learns that he is going to worship Nilamadeva, which was his whole purpose in coming, which he had failed to be able to know anything about up to that point. And then, of course, it becomes known that he wants to see Nilamadeva, but the Shabaras are very careful because they don't want anybody to know about Nilamadeva. So her father agrees to take him to see Nilamadeva, provided that he's blindfolded. So, of course, Vidyapati, the minister, is blindfolded, but he takes mustard seeds or something like that, and he puts them out as he's being taken to see Nilamadeva. And he knows that in a few weeks or so, the mustard plants will grow up, and he'll be able to follow the trail of mustard plants and find out where Nilamadava actually is, because this is what he wants to report back to Indradyumna Raj, who is actually very eager to know where Nilamadava is. So he finds out about it. Of course, the king wants to see Nilamadava. Vidyapati does see Nilamadava, but when the king comes, Nilamadava is not there anymore. Nilamadava disappears. And it wasn't because the Shabaras did something, it was because Nilamadava disappeared. And so then they wonder, well, what should we do? The king accuses the Shabaras of hiding, and they have a battle. It's a whole big issue comes about. And finally, the king finds out in a dream that Nilamadava has disappeared, but he will come in a new form, and this form will be a wooden form, which has been predicted in the scriptures. And of course, a log washes up on the banks of Puri, and then Vishvakarma, the architect of the demigods, comes, and he is tasked with the process of actually carving Jagannath. So he does carve Jagannath to some extent, but the stipulation is that if he's interrupted, he will not complete. And so the king is happy that he's going to finally see Nilamadava in the form of Jagannath. But at some point, the king and his wife learn or hear that the sounds of the carving of the Jagannath deity from the logs of wood stop. So they wonder, did the carver disappear? Did something happen to him? Did he have some kind of medical problem? And then we learn that they go in, the king goes in, and the voice, a disembodied voice, say, "You have interrupted my work, so I will not complete these murtis." And the king feels that his life is worthless now. He wants to commit suicide, but Jagannath appears to him saying, no, that this form, even though it's incomplete, is perfect. So we hear about that. Even though the form is incomplete, it's still perfect. And there are three forms, Jagannath, Baladev, and Lady Subhadra. So they decide that those forms will be worshipped. And eventually, Indradyumna Raj wants to create a big temple for them, which he does. He has enormous amount of effort to create this huge temple, the Jagannath Puri temple. And then he wants Lord Brahma to come and be there for the temple opening. So he goes to see Lord Brahma, but Lord Brahma's busy at the time. And, since Lord Brahma's time is not the same as our time, when Brahma agrees to come for the opening of the temple, Indradyumna comes back to find out everybody he knew is already dead, and nobody even remembers anything about it. But he decides to push on anyway, and he meets the reincarnation of Vidyapati. He meets the reincarnation of all the other people that were part of his team. And they do have Brahma come. They open the Jagannath Puri temple, and Lord Jagannath is installed in the Puri temple. And now that he's installed in the Puri temple, people can begin to worship him. And then eventually the tradition comes that once a year, Jagannath will come out of the temple, and he goes 1 mile or 2 miles rather, or 3 kilometers from, as Pancharatna mentioned yesterday, from the Puri temple to Gundicha temple. And he stays there for 7 days and then comes back. So that's the Rath Yatra, the original Rath Yatra. And that's one story. The other story is, well, why such a strange form, Jagannath with no arms and big face? The British saw this as very strange. And of course, it mentions that, what was his name? Buchanan, Christian minister, preached that this was Moloch, a demon, and that this whole festival was a festival of blood and killing children. He made up all this stuff just so that Westerners would be appalled, and that they were hoping that then they could bring the Indians to all being Christians, because they were debunking this whole thing and showing how primitive and savage it was, They were describing Jagannath as having a mouth dripping with blood. His mouth is not dripping with blood. It's just red colored. And then others after also had a similar misunderstanding. So this is how the Western world came to miscomprehend everything about Indian culture. First of all, they didn't understand it. Secondly, for the most part, you can hardly blame them that most people in India didn't understand Indian culture. So, and then you had the Christians who wanted to push the entire Vedic idea out of India and replant it with Christianity. So all that's there. And then after some time, Muslims ruled India for a while, then the British ruled India for a while, and at a certain point the British government discovered that Jagannath Puri was a very lucrative place. People came there, and a lot of money changed hands. They imposed a tax, and they, thought it was great. For that, they had fought against it all this time, and then now they were accepting money. So, it kind of changed their attitude. But still, nobody really understood very much about Jagannath. We have this story about how at one time during the advent of a solar eclipse, actually, before we get to that story, there is a story about how Rukmini visits the queens of Dwarka, and the queens of Dwarka want to know what it was like to be in Vrindavan, because they hear that their husband, Krishna, who, when he's asleep, he calls out Radha. Who is this Radha? Who are these gopis? So this is all a period and a place that they don't know anything about. But they know Rohini knows about it because she was there in Vrindavan. So she agrees to tell them, but it has to be in secret. So all of them hide away in a room, and they put Lady Subhadra as the policeman. So if Krishna or anyone else comes, she's supposed to sound the alarm, and they'll stop talking about the pastimes of Krishna in Vrindavan, because these are too secret, too not to be shared among anybody and everybody. So Subhadra is at the door, and she's listening to Rukmini telling about these early pastimes with Krishna and the gopis in Vrindavan. So she's hearing about this, and queens are hearing about it. Everybody's in ecstasy. And Subhadra is in so much ecstasy that her arms retract into her body, and her eyes get very big, and her head gets very big, and she's stunned. This is a type of ecstasy. So Krishna, of course, the meeting happened in the middle of the day, because they knew that's the time that Krishna would be at work, his, running of the kingdom, of Dwarka. So they chose that time specifically, but Krishna knew what was going on. So he decided to come and check it out. And so he's sneaking in there to see what's going on, and he sees Subhadra. And he sees that she's in this strange form of her arms retracted and her face very big, and she's stunned. And of course she's stunned, so she doesn't even notice that Krishna is there. And she's supposed to be guarding against Krishna being there, but she's completely oblivious. So Krishna begins to think, well, what are they speaking about? And then he realizes they're speaking about him and his pastimes with the gopis. So he's really eager to hear that, and he's hearing these pastimes with the gopis. And Krishna's arms retract into his body, and his face gets very big, and he becomes stunned, and he's like that, because this is all happening outside the door. So the queens, they don't see this, only they assume that Subhadra is doing her job, which she isn't. And then it just so happens that Balaram is walking by, and he sees his brother and his sister, and they're in this strange form of arms contracted and head very big, and this stunned form. You think, what could possibly be going on here? And he's listening, and his arms retract, and his face gets very big. So this is the form of Jagannath, where it comes from. This was the form that Vishvakarma was attempting to capture in the log of wood that becomes Jagannath, So that's where the form comes from. That's story 2. And then story 3 is why Jagannath comes in the first place, which I told about a month ago. That's the story at the Chaitanya Mangala, where we learn about the vow of Parvati, to deliver the mercy to everyone. So I'm not going to tell that story again. Then we have the story about the queens and the members of Krishna's entourage in Dwarka coming and meeting the residents of Vrindavan on the advent of a eclipse. So they all come together, and so when they all come together, the gopis see Krishna for the first time in years. He left Vrindavan, when he was a young man, and was called by Akrura to come to Mathura to fight the battle with the wrestlers that Kamsa had arranged. So Krishna had promised he would be back in a few days, which of course was a lie. It didn't happen. He stayed away, and the gopis knew that they were being basically deprived of Krishna's association, so they fought. And they tried to stop the horses, but Krishna left anyway. And then he went to Mathura. And in Mathura, he met Kamsa, and he met the wrestlers, Mustika and Chanura. And Krishna vanquished, the wrestlers, along with his brother Balaram. And then Krishna killed Kamsa. Then, of course, Balaram killed Kamsa's brothers and relatives. And so Krishna then installed Ugrasena on the throne of Mathura. And Kamsa had many allies, so they kept attacking. And as a result, because there was constant warfare, the idea of constantly being attacked didn't sit well with Krishna, so he decided to remove himself from Mathura and start a kingdom in Dwarka, which was on an island in the ocean. So that's what Krishna did. So he left Mathura after some time, and the entire management of the kingdom left Mathura and went to Dwarka city. So that's where Krishna lived for many years, and that's where some of these pastimes happen. Of course, as we were saying, this pastime occurred during the solar eclipse, and the gopis came, and Radharani said it was nice to see Krishna, but she couldn't appreciate Krishna in the context of the great assembly with all of his ministers and the rattling of chariots and so many soldiers and everything. She wanted to see him where she knew him best, in Vrindavan. So she and the gopis mentally are bringing Krishna back to Vrindavan. And this is the origin, one of the explanations for the Rath Yatra festival. What's going on in the chariots is that the gopis are bringing Krishna back to Vrindavan. So that's another aspect of it. Then you have another story. You can see how complex this whole thing is. There's these overlays and overlays and overlays. So you have Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is, of course, the Supreme Lord. But he is in the mood of Radha, and there's a reason why he's in the mood of Radha. And then Jagannath's in the mood of Jagannath, and so when Lord Chaitanya is dancing in front of the Rath Yatra cart, it's like Radha is leading Krishna back to Vrindavan. And so sometimes Lord Chaitanya is out in front of the cart, and the cart is moving, and sometimes Lord Chaitanya goes behind the cart and the cart stops. And in this way, there is this interplay between Lord Chaitanya and Lord Jagannath. And Lord Chaitanya is, to some extent, playing the part of Radharani, and Lord Jagannath is playing the part of Lord Jagannath. So who is Jagannath? Jagannath is Lord Krishna in the form of ecstasy, with his, as we were saying a minute ago, with his arms retracted. That's why he has that unusual shape, and with big eyes and a big mouth. So this is Jagannath. But on another level, the Rath Yatra is about picking up from yesterday's class that Pancharatna was giving, is that we live in a world where God isn't seen. We live in a world where people don't have any idea of what's really going on. We live in a world where people are distracted by myriads of petty and useless things. So people are distracted. And how would they ever be reclaimed? How would they ever come back to spiritual life? Because as we know, Krishna is giving everybody their free will. So he's not going to force people to come back to Godhead. He's not going to interfere with their free will. So doesn't that mean then that no one will go back home, back to Godhead, and people will rot in this material world with all of its material distraction, and gradually becoming more and more dirtied by their various sinful activities until they basically become candidates for hell? So what could be the solution to this problem? And one of the answers is that the Supreme Lord comes with the idea of attracting the living entities back home, back to Godhead. So normally, Jagannath is in the Puri temple. He stays there. And as we know, unless you have been born in India, you will not be allowed in the Jagannath Puri temple. There are devotees who have broken the rule and tried to get in. Especially if you've got darker skin, you can pull it off. If you don't have dark skin, there's no chance that you're going to be in there. So Bhaktitirtha Swami snuck in once or twice, but one time he got caught and he had to run for his life. So, because, you know, if you don't open your mouth, they don't know that you can't speak the language, you know. You just kind of go in and come out. But there's one time during the year where Jagannath does not hide away in the Puri temple, but he comes out. Of course, that time is Rath Yatra. So during this time is where Jagannath is the most merciful, where he allows himself to be seen by anyone and everyone. So this is with the idea of attracting people back home, back to Godhead. We see it even in our own, Rath Yatra here in New York City, that, tourist mama and tourist papa are walking down the street with baby one, baby two, and and they see this, oh, it's a festival. And look at that, colorful carts. What's on the cart? Gee, I don't know what that is, but it's odd and interesting. It's colorful. So, people are captivated by it. And this may be the very first time that they have ever come in contact with the Murti of the Lord, that they would ordinarily never, ever come in contact with. And as we were talking about the other day, unfortunately in the Western world, there is so much misconception about God that some, and many religionists in our modern religions, do not even accept that God has a form at all. They eschew the whole idea that there could be some kind of form of the divine, because they think that must be some kind of imagination. Or there are those who think that there is no God, or there are those who think that they give some human being the potency or the idea of God, or they think every human being is God. We're all God. So these are all varieties of misconceptions. So to see the Supreme Lord in the form of Jagannath is a very special mercy, and that's one of the reasons why Lord Jagannath comes, just like Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya comes to his internal reason, is to experience the mood of Radharani. His external reason for coming is to attract the living entities back home, back to Godhead, and give the Yuga Dharma, which is, for 10 points, what is it? Okay, all right, chanting the holy name. So he's the Yuga avatar. He comes to establish the chanting of the Lord's holy name. So he comes to that. But Jagannath also, as mentioned in the Chaitanya Mangala, comes to deliver the mercy to every living being as Parvati's vow. So he comes, therefore, to allow people to see him and perhaps be attracted. And in this way, this is another special mercy of the Lord. Any questions about any of that? Gopal Shankar has a question.
I have a question, Maharaj, about the verse today. Hare Krishna. About the verse today.
Uh-huh.
So, the last line, Lord Brahma is saying, it is best to let the Almighty Lord direct us.
Yeah.
So, I was just thinking about this point that, for example, right now we have 10 devotees in this assembly. And it could be we have some tasks to accomplish, and then it could be that the 10 of us have 10 different ideas of how that should be done.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do we understand which is the Lord's direction, which is the Lord's will? How
Well, that's a good and a reasonable question. Generally speaking, just as in the spiritual world, you have various gopis, and they work under manjaris. There's kind of a system of organization there. So you have some that are given tasks by others. So we have that here. But we also have our own individual sense of how we can use our creativity. And this is a point that I want to make. We are not some kind of dead stone, nor are we mannequins or robots. We are individuals. And so if we're not using our individuality, what's happening to it? Of course, we have many individual traits and qualities that are just a product of our many years and many lifetimes of material engagement. So that's not necessarily what we mean by individuality, But we see that even in the spiritual world, not every gopi plays the same musical instruments. Not everyone's engaged in exactly the same activities. So we have certain things that we need to carry out because there is an organization. As ISKCON, we're organized. At least to some extent. Some people would argue with that, and even I might sometimes. But, the idea is that we are trying to follow some direction. But at the same time, we also have our own interests and proclivities, and it's not wrong to try to use your own particular interests. I think Arjunananda was mentioning that, or somebody was mentioning that a few days ago, that idea that we have things that we find easier or we find ourselves... No, it was Tulsi was mentioning that the other day. That's where I remember hearing it, that we find our way of, doing something to utilize our particular inclinations for serving Krishna. So that's there too. So both of those things are there. And one of the things that I was really thinking about lately was that we shouldn't just become bubble boys and bubble girls, rattling things off. It's something that Hare Krishna devotees really get into doing, we just rattle things off. Oh, that's Maya, or you're not the body, Prabhu, or, we know all these things, and it's not that these things aren't true, but it's easy to get into an automatic pilot, where we do things. And being an automatic pilot isn't evil in itself, but it can become that way, especially with japa. That's one place where you don't want any automatic pilot, and that's what makes particularly chanting the holy name difficult, because we have to constantly turn the automatic pilot off. Otherwise, we're just mama, 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 ba, 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 we're just doing the snick, snick, ram, ram mantra, and that is kind of what we get into. And so we give answers before we understand what's actually being asked. We deal with things as if they are archetypal situations where there's specifics that we're ignoring, and sometimes we don't actually pay attention to what we're doing. We do things with the idea that we can tell somebody we did them, that we can say, I finished it. Somebody said, well, did you do this? And you can say, yes, I did it. You wash the pots. Yeah, I did something that resembled washing the pots. And now it's over. Did you write a particular proposal? Yeah, I wrote something, Did you attend Mangal Arati? Yeah, my body was there, So, this is what I mean. And Krishna says in that, there's that story where, Krishna is asking his father about, the worship of King Indra, and he says, is this a ritual? Is it traditional? And he says that those who do something, they get some benefit, but those who know what they're doing get more benefit. So it's kind of turning the brain on, especially with japa, because the easiest thing is to not pay attention to the fact that you're not paying attention, or to to ignore the fact that you're ignoring the fact, or to be oblivious to the fact that you're oblivious, So it just goes on, hour after hour after hour, and at some point you've got to click on. At some point you have to recognize I've got to do something about that. And we have prayers. Do we know what they mean? Have we tried to? I mean, it's not like you can memorize them all overnight or anything like that, but if you make an understanding of why you do what you do, why you say what you say, if you've got a task given to you, is it worth doing enough that you're actually clicking on and thinking, well, I could just basically do it so that if somebody asks me, did you do it, I can answer that question with yes. Or did I do it in a way that actually I thought about it? I thought about the long-term practicalities. I thought about whether I did it in the best possible way, so on and so forth. So this is, as sometimes devotees say, I think Prabhupada said it, before becoming Krishna conscious, you have to become conscious. So, and the more we can come to grips with what we're doing and why we're doing it, the more Krishna consciousness will become a real thing, and you may just get a hint of what's really going on. Why is it, that we're bubbling our way through these things? I'm living in a bubble. I'm doing these things. We're doing all these things mechanically. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but we're missing something deeper. And occasionally, you may actually get a sniff at what Krishna consciousness is really all about, There's a saying in English, I'm so broke I can't even pay attention. But paying attention is actually not an easy thing to pay, because that's what Krishna consciousness is all about, paying constant attention. And nobody wants to do that. We like our automatic pilot, and we like to be doing something while our brain is doing something else. But the more we can kind of bring ourselves around, the more Krishna consciousness will take on a full 3D perspective. And we may recognize that actually that is the Supreme Lord on the altar. And although we're moving around and it looks like Radha and Govinda are just there, it's really the other way around. They're moving everything, and we're the people who are just there, but we don't think that way. We don't see it that way, because the whole material world is there to hypnotize us in this false conception. It's there to hypnotize us in a false conception. And it's so strong that at all times and all places we are level down, covered by this, covered by that, covered by yet something else. And once in a while, we may get a peek at what Krishna consciousness is really all about. How could King Indradyumna be so completely preoccupied with wanting to see Nila Madhava, that he was a king, and the one thing he was preoccupied with was seeing Nila Madhava. He wanted his armies to help find Nila Madhava. He sent out his, emissary, Vidyapati. But just imagine what kind of consciousness that would be, He wasn't doing it because somebody told him to do it. He was just like that. So we can become like that too, believe it or not, and it happens gradually by degrees. So, at any rate, that was my soapbox moment, and we're over time. So unless there's any other outstanding questions of immense gravity, we will adjourn. And thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. All glories to the Rath Yatra festival that delivers the Kali Yuga bunnies from the snare of Maya in its deepest, darkest way. So, Hare Krishna.
His Holiness Chandrasekhar Maharaj Ki.